Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. Do you imagine being a child king, manipulated by ambitious adults in the middle of a brutal war? Discover the tragic story of Carlos VIII of France, a monarch used as a pawn in a power game. Subscribe and activate the bell so as not to miss anything. Imagine, for a moment, a barely 13-child, crowned king of France. That was Carlos VIII, a small monarch in a world of palatial intrigues and excessive ambitions. His arrival on the throne was an event full of uncertainty, a young man without the necessary experience to govern such a complex and powerful kingdom. From the beginning, his life was marked by manipulation, becoming a key piece on the chessboard of European politics. His young age made him a vulnerable king, easily influenced by the powerful around him. The nobles, eager for power, competed for their favor, seeking to control the young monarch and, through him, the fate of France. You will see how the decisions they made around him, often in his name, moved him away from true real authority. Carlos VIII, despite his youth, was not a simple puppet. He had an enigmatic personality, of which few certain details are known. Some sources describe it as a weak young man, easily manipulated. Others portray him as a ruler with secret ambitions, a king who struggled to find his own path in the middle of the chaos of the French court. What was the true nature of this enigmatic monarch? Think of France in the 15th century. VIII was not a peaceful and united country. Imagine a mosaic of kingdoms, ducats and manors, each with their own ambitions and fighting for power. Almost constant war, among powerful nobles who disputed territories in real favor, even against the crown itself. It was a time of instability, where loyalty was a scarce good and betrayal an ordinary currency. The wars between English and French continued to leave their scars. The 100 years, although technically finished, had left a legacy of resentment and unresolved territorial disputes. Remember that the French nobility, hungry for power and wealth, constantly sought the opportunity to expand their domains or take revenge on former rivals. Each nobleman was a player in a complex power game, where alliances were formed and broke with the same ease as a promise. In addition to external wars, the internal ambition of the kingdom. The French crown, although powerful, did not have total control over its vassals. The nobles, with their private armies and their changing loyalties, represented a constant threat to the stability of the kingdom. Each sought to increase their influence, challenging the king and his decisions. Even in the court itself, it was a climate of conspiracy and betrayal, where survival depended on the ability to navigate treacherous waters. Well, imagine a baby, Carlos, born in 1470. He was not any child. He was the heir to the throne of France, although his arrival in the world was not precisely a moment of peace and tranquility. France, as I told you, was at war, a real hotbed of conflicts. His childhood was marked by political instability, growing between intrigues and power struggles that had little to do with fairy tales. His early years were a succession of guardians and regents, figures that tried to control power in his name. Think of him, a small child, surrounded by adults with his own agendas, manipulated at will. He did not have a normal childhood free of concerns. Rather, a political childhood, every decision made by others in its name, even the most trivial. The education he received, although destined to forge him as king, was far from being complete. More than learning to govern, he learned to survive in a hostile and treacherous environment. Military strategy lessons came before philosophy or humanities, a sad reality of the time. His childhood was an involuntary training for war, a preparation for an uncertain future. But what about a baby king? You need regents, right? There Louis XI enters, your cunning grandfather. He, the king before Carlos, made sure that everything worked in his own way, even from the grave. Although he had already died, his influence hovered on the court, handling the threads from the hereafter, or at least that seemed. And then there is Anna de Beaujeu, your aunt. She was the real force behind the throne, which really made decisions. Imagine a woman in a world dominated by men, handling the reins of the French kingdom. A real queen in the shadow. Louis XI, from his political beach, and Anna, with his firmness and cunning, directed the regency. It was a complex time, full of intrigues and struggles for power. Think about it. A child king, a powerful aunt, and the shadow of a deceased king. What could go wrong? Prosody. Speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%, but the tranquility of the regency broke soon. Just a child, you, Carlos VIII, you were in the midst of a political maelstrom. The Breton War of Succession, Brittany, an independent duchy, was in dispute and France wanted a slice of the cake. Imagine. You, a king baby, turned into a key piece on the European chessboard. The ambitions of the French nobles, the veracity of your grandfather from the grave. Everything was intertwined to get involved in a war that you barely understood. The conflict revolved around the succession of the duchy. Various noble families claimed the Breton throne, and France, under the influence of the regents and ambitions of Louis XI, got involved to support a particular side. Think about pressure. Even without understanding the conflict, you were the face of French intervention, a tool in the hands of adults with hidden interests. Your name was used to justify wars, alliances, and betrayals. The war was not a simple battle, but a complex network of alliances and betrayals. England, always vigilant, also got involved, adding another layer of complexity to the conflict. For you, a king's child, everything was a mystery. The decisions that were made in your name, the consequences of a war that was fought in your name, it was a tough lesson of medieval politics, learned on the battlefield, through the noise of the swords and the weight of a crown too large for your head. But you, Carlos, were only one piece on the end of Beaujeu board, your regent. She, the daughter of Louis XI, an intelligent and cunning woman, handled the threads of power with an unique mastery. While you played with your toys, she negotiated alliances, controlled the nobility, and ensured the stability of the kingdom. Its objective: keep the crown firmly in your hands, but under its strong control. Its strategy was based on discretion and manipulation. He did not seek the ostentatious power, but the real power which is exercised from the shadows. With skilled movements, he neutralized your enemies, placating their ambitions with promises and strategic marriages. Remember that every decision, each appointment, each treaty, were carefully placed pieces in their intricate game. While the Breton War of Succession absorbed you and consolidated her position, she knew how to take advantage of disputes between the nobles, sowing discord between them to weaken them and maintain their own intact power. His influence extended throughout the kingdom, reaching every corner of the government. Without you, the child king, you would notice the true force that operated around you. Imagine you, the intricate network of alliances that surrounded Carlos VIII, the Duke of Brittany. Francisco II, initially an ally, became an obstacle to French ambitions in Brittany. Remember that alliances at that time were not unwavering ties, but fragile agreements based on political conveniences and the fear of more powerful enemies. Loyalty was bought and sold, and betrayal was ordinary currency. Maximiliano I, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, initially allied with France, but the territorial ambitions of both soon faced them. Think of complexity. Maximiliano was married to Maria de Burgundy, heiress of a rich duchy, which made him a key player on the European board. His alliance with France was a strategy, but betrayal always stalked. Even within the French court itself, the palatial intrigues threatened the stability of Carlos's reign, and de Beaujeu, its regent, wove a network of alliances to maintain control, while other nobles conspired in the shadow, looking for their own benefit. Betrayal was a constant risk, a latent threat that hidden over the young king. But Brittany was not the only front. You, as an observer of the story, you will see how Carlos VIII, still a child, began to show an unexpected temper. The intrigues of the court, the pressures of the ambitious nobles, all that began to forge their character. It was no longer just a pawn in a chess game, but little by little it began to move its own pieces. Look at how their decisions, although still influenced by their directors, began to reflect their own will. Remember the constant pressure of the nobles, each with their own agendas. But Carlos VIII, despite his youth, demonstrated an ability to discern, to choose between the contradictory advice he received. It was a slow process, a slow learning. It was not an instant transformation, but a gradual evolution. You will see how, through small acts of apparently insignificant decisions, Carlos VIII began to build his own reign. The alliances changed, the betrayals multiplied, but he, the king, learned to navigate in that turbulent sea. Prosody, speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%. But the day came, you, witness of the story, you will see Carlos VIII, just a teenager, claim what belonged to him by right on August 23, 1483. At the tender age of 13, the regency was ended. Years of guardianships, of court intrigues, of decisions made in his name. All that ended. A young king, still inexperienced, but with the determination to govern with his own fist and lyrics. Imagine the scene. The weight of a freshly placed crown on his head, the responsibility of an entire kingdom on his shoulders. You, as a privileged observer, will understand the challenge he represented for such a young boy. The pressure of the nobles, the expectations of the people, the need to prove their worth, all that fell on their fragile shoulders. But Carlos VIII was ready to face it. The end of the regency did not mean an immediate and radical change. You will see how the young king, advised by his directors, began to make his own decisions, although with caution. The transition process was gradual, but undeniable. Carlos VIII began to consolidate his power, to get rid of the influences that had kept him in the shadows during his childhood. Little by little, King Child became king throughout the extension of the word. So, there was Carlos VIII, a child king with a kingdom in his hands and a giant dream in his heart. Italy.it was not only a territorial ambition, you will understand, but the recovery of a lost kingdom for the French crown. Naples, that jewel of the South, resonated in the minds of his directors, a treasure to claim, an ancestral right that was lost over the centuries. The idea of an Italian campaign was not new. Generations of French kings had dreamed of it. But Carlos, with his youth and energy, turned it into an obsession. The Kingdom of Naples, with its wealth and its strategic location, represented a key piece for the control of the Mediterranean, and for France, a door to expansion and power. For you, it is easy to see the magnitude of the bet. Italy's dream, and in particular, the conquest of Naples, became the engine of French politics during the following years. For you, imagining it is easy. A young king, driven by ambition and the promise of glory, prepares for an adventure that would change the course of history. The recovery of Naples became a matter of honor, of national pride, in something that would define his reign. But how is a child king prepared to conquer Italy? It is not as simple as gathering a few soldiers, right? First, you had to get the money. Imagine, Carlos needed to finance a huge army, pay transport, equipment, a fortune. You had to raise taxes, ask for loans to the most powerful bankers, and even sell some crown jewels. Everything to finance your ambitious project. Then the troops. Not only did you need soldiers, but also mercenaries, people of different kingdoms with different loyalties. A real puzzle. Think of logistics. Recruit, equip, train. It was a huge army. A mixture of French knights, English archers, and fortune soldiers from all over Europe, at a considerable force, but also a heterogeneous group that could be difficult to control. And finally, the supply. Such a big army needed food, weapons, horses, an immense amount of resources. We had to organize transportation, supplies routes, warehouses. Imagine the difficulty of keeping an army in motion for months, far from home. Any failure in the supply chain could mean the disaster. You needed an army, and what an army you had: French, proud and brave gentlemen, with their brilliant armor and their imposing spears, thousands of them, willing to follow you until the end of the world, or at least to Italy. But were they invincible? Of course not. Remember that many of these warriors were mercenaries, loyal only to those who best paid them, and their loyalty was as volatile as the climate in the Alps. Your artillery, although modern for the time, was limited. You did not have the amount of cannons that you would need for a prolonged place, and its mobility was a problem in difficult land. In addition, he thinks of logistics. Feeding, equipping, and maintaining such a large army thousands of kilometers from home was a titanic task, which required an impeccable organization and an efficient supply chain, something that was not always fulfilled. And finally, but not least, was the question of experience. While you had a large and well-equipped army, many of your soldiers had not fought in large-scale battles. Facing Italian veterans, tanned in 1,000 battles, would be a huge challenge. His knowledge of the land and his war tactics could be the key to counteracting your numerical superiority. /prosody, /speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. But wait, does an entire army crossing the Alps? It was not just a matter of courage, but of pure and hard logistics. Imagine, thousands of men, horses, supplies, cars. All that ascending for those imposing peaks. The land was treacherous, the unpredictable climate, and each step represented a monumental challenge. Military engineers had to sweat ink to find the best steps. And you, Carlos, should fully trust their expertise. The supply was a nightmare. Each piece of equipment, each bite of food, each drop of water had to be transported through steep and dangerous roads. The snowstorms could isolate your troops in a matter of hours, leaving many at the mercy of cold and hunger. You had to make crucial decisions in times of crisis, deciding which routes to follow and what supplies prioritize to ensure the survival of your army. In addition to weather and logistics, defense was another constant concern. The Alps were not only a physical challenge, but also an ideal terrain for ambush. Mercenario bands, or even the mountain inhabitants themselves, could take advantage of the land to attack your troops, weakening your army and putting your strategy in check. Each step should be calculated, each precision-planned movement to ensure the success of the expedition. And so, after the epic crossing of the Alps, you arrived in Italy, your young army, tired but victorious, met against Naples. The city, with its imposing walls, seemed impregnable, but the internal situation was something else. The kingdom was divided, with different factions fighting for power. This, my friend, was your great advantage. You took advantage of internal disputes and changing alliances. With a series of bright maneuvers, you surprised your enemies. The defenses, weakened by internal struggles, collapsed with relative ease. It was not a bloody and prolonged conquest, but a quick and almost surprising taking of the city. The Neapolitan nobility, divided and in conflict, did not offer a unified resistance. Imagine the scene. You, a young king, conquering one of Italy's most important kingdoms with amazing speed. The news ran like gunpowder throughout Europe. The speed of your victory made you a legend, at least for a while. But remember, friend, quick conquests often hide deeper problems, and that very brilliant victory in Naples would not be the exception. But the conquest of Naples did not go unnoticed. In Italy, the rapid victory of Carlos VIII generated a mixture of amazement and fear. The Italian states, accustomed to their own power struggles, saw with concern the arrival of such a powerful foreign army. Florence, for example, felt threatened, fearing French expansion towards its territories. Remember that the French king was not only a young king, but the leader of a powerful army who had conquered Naples with surprising ease. Beyond Italy, the news of the conquest resonated throughout Europe. The other kings and rulers observed carefully the movements of Carlos VIII, wondering what their next objectives would be. The success in Naples demonstrated the French military power and the vulnerability of Italian states. For some, it was an opportunity. For others, a threat. The balance of power in Europe had altered significantly, and existing alliances were questioned. The youth ambition of Carlos VIII, its rapid victory and the subsequent occupation of Naples caused a chain reaction. The kings, concerned about French expansion, began to form alliances to counteract their power. An uncertain future was glimpsed, full of tensions and wars, where the figure of the young French king became the center of all eyes, an unpredictable factor that could change the fate of Europe. You yourself are witnessing this crucial moment. But his triumph in Naples brought him powerful enemies. Pope Alejandro VI, a member of the powerful Borgia family, saw the French ambition suspicious. He feared that Carlos VIII, with his victorious army, interfere in Italian affairs, threatening papal power. Remember that the Pope was not only a religious leader, but also a key player in Italian politics. Fernando II of Aragon, King of Spain and Sicily, also felt threatened. The conquest of Naples directly affected their interests in the region. That he and Carlos VIII were cousins, but that did not prevent Fernando from seeing Carlos as a threat to his power, and quickly joined the league of enemies that formed against the French king. But not only the Pope and Fernando opposed Carlos VIII, the different Italian states, such as Venice, Milan, and the Florence of the Medici, also formed a league against him. Each had their own reasons to fear French power. Some sought to maintain their independence, and others saw the opportunity to benefit from the weakness of their rivals. The ambition of Carlos VIII had unleashed a complex network of alliances and enmity. Prosody. Speak. A prosody rate equals 90%, but Carlos VIII's victory in Naples did not last long. His ambition unleashed the fury of the powerful. Look, Pope Alejandro VI, a cunning and ambitious man, belonging to the Borgia family, saw in the French presence a threat to his power. He feared the progress of France in Italy, and decided to act. Thus, Alejandro VI formed the Santa League, a powerful alliance designed to expel the French from Italy. You imagine the magnitude of this. The Pope, King Ferdinand II of Aragon joined forces, yes, the same one that Granada conquered, King Federico I of Naples, expelled by Carlos VIII, and Emperor Maximiliano I of the Holy Roman Empire, Germanic and unstoppable force. Each had their own reasons to join the League, but the goal was common: to stop the French expansion. Fernando de Aragon wanted to recover control over Naples. Federico, of course, yearned for recovering his kingdom. Maximiliano, meanwhile, saw in the alliance an opportunity to increase its influence in Italy and counteract the power of France. Think about the complexity of alliances and interests at stake. So, imagine, the Santa League came over Carlos VIII. He had underestimated his enemies, right? He believed that his rapid conquest of Naples would make him the undisputed king of Italy, but he was wrong. The answer was immediate and furious. The French army, tired and with supplies diminishing, was suddenly surrounded by a much more numerous and powerful coalition. The confrontation that would change the course of his campaign was approaching, the Battle of Fornovo. The Battle of Fornovo in July 1495 was a real chaos. You imagine the noise, dust, smell of gunpowder and sweat. The French army, although lower in number, fought with courage, taking advantage of the tactics of battle formation in wedge, trying to break the enemy lines. The French cavalry, despite its least amount, loaded furiously, seeking to make their way between the troops of the Santa League. The battle was undecided, a fierce struggle where courage and strategy intertwined in a mortal dance. Neither sides achieved a clear victory at the end of the day. Both armies were exhausted, with important casualties. Although technically, Carlos VIII managed to retire, the Battle of Fornovo marked the effective purpose of his Italian ambitions. Well, the victory in Fornovo was Pyrrhica. Your armies, tired and decimated, were forced to retire. The rapid conquest of Naples had become a distant dream. The Santa League, although it had not completely defeated you, had stopped your advance, and the way back to France was glimpsed long and dangerous. Each step was a fight against fatigue, hunger, and the constant threat of ambush. Logistics was a disaster. The supply of your troops was precarious, and the dropout became a serious problem. The enemies, strengthened by your withdrawal, constantly harassed you, taking advantage of every opportunity to attack your weakened flanks. The vision of a quick and easy victory in Italy had faded, replaced by the harsh reality of expensive and humiliating defeat. The ambition to conquer Italy had failed loudly. Not only did you not have managed to consolidate your conquests in the south, but you had lost much of your army and your prestige. The dream of a French empire in Italy had become a nightmare, and your return to France would be remembered not as a victory, but as a humiliating failure. The withdrawal became a precipitated flight, leaving behind the echo of a poorly planned and poorly executed campaign. The withdrawal of Italy left you with a bitter taste, right? Despite the initial demonstration of force, the campaign had been expensive. Thousands of soldiers perished, not only in battles, but also for diseases and fatigue. Your real treasure, already reduced by the expenses of the war, suffered a devastating blow. France's prestige, although not destroyed, had been affected by the lack of a forceful victory. But not everything was losses. The campaign, although failed in its main objective, had given you an invaluable military experience. Your generals learned crucial lessons about logistics and war on foreign field. In addition, the brief occupation of Naples allowed you to familiarize yourself with the political complexities of Italy, information that could be useful in future campaigns. Although the conquest of Naples had vanished, the Italian campaign had served to demonstrate the French military force on the European stage. Although total domination was not achieved, the French presence in Italy had been established, which, in the long term, could mean a strategic advantage for France. The experience, despite its high cost, had taught you a valuable lesson. The conquest of Italy would require a more elaborate strategy and a greater investment of resources. Prosody, speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%. Yes, the withdrawal was a bitter drink. But Carlos VIII's ambition did not turn off with the defeat in Italy. His reign, although short, was marked by an expansionist eagerness that led him to dream of the conquest of Naples and the restoration of the old Franco kingdom in Italy. Remember that he was a young king, full of energy and with a great army behind him, ready for action. Despite his imperial dreams, his achievements were limited. The Italian campaign, although initially successful, was stopped by the resistance of Italian states and alliances that formed against them. His victories were ephemeral and the human and economic cost was enormous. Think about the effort and the price you paid for each small advance. His reign, despite his short duration, left a mark on history. Carlos VIII's ambition for restoring French power in Italy laid the foundations for future campaigns and conflicts. But he also demonstrated the difficulties of military expansion in a scenario as complex as Renaissance Italy, full of powerful state-city and complex alliances. It was a hard lesson, right? Well, although his reign was short, Carlos VIII's Italian ambition left a deep mark. Think about this. Its expedition, although militarily failed, opened the appetite of France by the Italian conquests, something that would mark French politics for decades. It was the beginning of Italian wars, an era of conflict and struggles for power in the peninsula. In the short term, the death of Carlos VIII left France in an uncertain situation. His reign, so brief and full of ambition, ended without a clear heir, generating political instability that affected the country. Imagine tension in court, disputes over power, and uncertainty about the future of the kingdom. In the long term, however, its impact was more durable. His foray into Italy, even if he ended up retired, laid the foundations for future French interventions in the peninsula. Remember that he opened Pandora's box, awakening the ambitions of other European powers, and began decades of conflicts that redrawed the map of Europe. Well, what do you think if we talk about Carlos VIII in person? He was an impulsive king, yes, with an almost overflowing energy. His decisions were often taken with the speed of lightning, without much deliberation. Imagine a young king, full of vigor and with a vision, although sometimes somewhat precipitous, of the world. That vision, I tell you, was the key. Despite his impetuousness, Carlos VIII had a clear idea of what he wanted: to claim the Kingdom of Naples and expand French power. It wasn't a small vision, right? For him, it was an attainable goal, although many would consider him a madman or a dreamer. His impulsivity, although sometimes he led him to strategic errors, was also his engine. That he did not hesitate to take risks, to launch into the adventure. Think about the audacity of its Italian campaign. A risky movement, but that reflected its vision and self-confidence, although many considered it reckless. So, although we see him as an impulsive king, he remembers that behind that impulsivity there was a vision, an ambition that, although it did not always translate into military success, left an indelible brand in the history of France and Europe. He was a king who, despite his failures, dared to dream big. But who advised him? There was the cunning Louis d'Orleans, his uncle, a man with a long political experience and an ambition that matched his cunning. That he, along with others, tried to guide the young king, sometimes successfully, other times. Well, let's say things were quite complicated. Remember that Carlos was impulsive, and that was difficult for anyone to control it completely. Another crucial character was de Beaujeu, the regent that France had governed before the age of Carlos. Although he no longer had the formal power, his influence on the young king was undeniable. She represented the wisdom and experience of a more stable government, something that deeply contrasted with Carlos's personality. Think about the tension between Anne's experience and Carlos's youth impulsivity. The French court at that time was full of nobles with its own agendas, many of them eager to take advantage of the king's inexperience. Some directors acted loyalty, others sought their own benefit, and some even conspired in the shadows. Imagine the intricate power game that was developed around the young king. A chessboard where each piece represented a powerful family or an ambitious individual. Prosody. Speak. Speak. To prosody rate equals 90%. Imagine the court of Carlos VIII. You'd a hotbed of nobles, ladies with richly embroidered dresses, gentlemen with shiny armor, and endless servants who strive between tapestries and candlesticks. The Amboise Palace, with its imposing towers, was the stage of lavish dances, chivalrous tournaments, and opulent banquets. Life in court was a constant show, a whirlwind of intrigues, romances, and power. But not everything was brightness and splendor. Under the surface of opulence, rivalries and conspiracies were hidden. Noble families competed for real favor, weaving alliances and plotting intrigues to increase their influence. Remember that Carlos VIII was a child, a king child, and his court was a battlefield where power was disputed without barracks. Important decisions were made between scenes, in secret meetings and whispers. The daily life in court revolved around the label and protocol. Each movement, every word, was carefully regulated, from the elaborate rituals of the food to the ceremonies of the court. Everything was designed to emphasize the majesty of the king and the social order. For you, this meant a life governed by strict rules and a constant struggle to maintain real favor and social position. But returning to court, can you imagine the stir caused by the union of Carlos VIII with Anne de Brittany? It was not a simple marriage, it was a key piece on the European political board. Anne, heiress of the Duchy of Brittany, was a coveted loot, a rich and strategic territory that many kings ambitioned. For Carlos, he meant consolidating his power and expanding the French borders. His marriage, held in 1491, was not exempt from controversies. Carlos, a king still young and inexperienced, faced the opposition of other suitors at the hand of Anna, including King Enrique VII of England. The union with Anna not only gave Brittany, but also provided a powerful ally and considerable wealth. Think of the implications. Brittany control meant access to important ports, economic resources, and a strategic position against England. For Anna, marriage represented a way of protecting its duchy from possible invasions and ensuring its future. It was a politically strategic union, a chess movement in the complex departure that was the Europe of the time. But the life of Carlos VIII, so full of ambitions, had an abrupt end. Imagine a young king, at the cusp of his power, falling victim of an accident. A simple blow to the head during a ball game ended his reign. Can you imagine the shock in court? The child king, who had conquered Naples, vanished in an instant, leaving an immense power vacuum. His death, at such an early age, left France in a delicate situation, without a direct heir. The succession to the throne became a crucial matter. The palatial intrigues, the ambitions of powerful nobles, everything broke out after the unexpected departure of the king. The future of France beat a thread, in the hands of those who sought to control power. The death of Carlos VIII not only marked the end of an era, but also reconfigured the European political map. His conquests in Italy, for example, were threatened. The power vacuum he left opened the door to new alliances, conflicts, and territorial disputes. La Paz, so fragile, broke again. Think about the long-term consequences, how the death of a single man can change the course of history. A blow, a fallen king, and France was suddenly without his monarch. You, as a spectator of this story, will wonder who inherit the throne. The answer, my friend, is Louis XII, Duke of Orleans, a distant relative but with an excessive ambition and an eye on the throne for a long time. His ascent was not exempt from challenges, since the succession was not entirely clear, but his cunning and his alliances led him to the crown. Louis XII, an unexpected heir, found a kingdom in full effervescence. The death of Carlos VIII left a void of power that he was in charge of filling quickly. Imagine a new king with new ideas, ready to implement his own political and military strategies. But his reign was not exempt from problems. He had to consolidate his power, and he did it with a firm hand. His gaze headed to Italy, an objective that Carlos VIII had pursued with fervor. Louis XII, with a more calculated strategic vision, did not launch into the blind conquest. Instead, he wove alliances, prepared his armies, and undertook the Italian conquest with a more meticulous plan. This ambition, this long-term vision, would mark a new chapter in the history of France, a chapter where military diplomacy and strategy were intertwined. Prosody, speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%. But who really was Carlos VIII? You, who have followed its story so far, will wonder if it was a simple puppet in the hands of ambitious directors, or if it had any degree of control over their own destiny. His short life, marked by political instability, leaves us with many questions. Was he able to make his own decisions, or was he completely at the mercy of court intrigues? His ambition to conquer Naples, was it his own decision or the result of the influence of powerful nobles who sought to expand their power and influence? He considers that at his young age, Carlos VIII amounted to the throne in the middle of a still unstable France. The pressure of the nobility, always anxious to power, could have guided him in his most important decisions. Let's analyze the letters, the documents, the chronicles of the time. Despite his youth and lack of experience, Carlos VIII showed moments of decision and courage. Its Italian campaign, although finally failing, demonstrates a certain degree of initiative and boldness. Was it an impulsive decision, or a strategic calculation that went wrong? The answer is not simple and requires analyzing the political and military context of the time. Remember, the story is not black and white, and the figure of Carlos VIII is an example of this. So how has Carlos VIII arrived in the image we have of him today? A weak child king, manipulated incessantly, or something else? The answer, my friend, is complex. The story, as you know, is written by the victors, and in the case of Carlos VIII, the narrative has been built through the centuries, molded by the interests of those who wrote it. He is often painted as a naive king, easily influenced, a puppet in the hands of his ambitious counselors. But this image, although partially true, also hides nuances. Some historians highlight their courage in the Italian campaign, their audacity when facing major powers. Its short life, full of transcendental events, has contributed to a legend, a mixture of failure and success that fascinates and continues to be the object of debate. His reign, although brief, left a mark, although not always the desired one. The construction of its legacy has therefore been a process of interpretation and constant reinterpretation. Depending on the historical perspective, he has been considered an inept king or a visionary king, a simple pawn or a bold player. After touring your story, you can form your own opinion. What do you think? How would you define Carlos VIII's legacy? Think of other kings of the time. Enrique VII of England, for example, cunning and calculating, consolidating its power with strategic marriages and a firm hand. Or Fernando and Isabel in Spain, forging a powerful nation through the reconquest and sponsorship of Cologne. Carlos VIII, in comparison, looks like a child lost in an adult game, right? His youth played a bad pass, prevented the political maturity necessary to navigate the complex waters of Renaissance Europe. Unlike these monarchs who built their power through strategy and diplomacy, Carlos VIII was dragged by the ambitions of his directors. While other kings forged alliances, he threw himself into the conquest of Italy driven by the dream of recovering the Kingdom of Naples, a dream that, as we will see, turned out to be a dangerous and expensive illusion. His lack of experience and his dependence on others made him a piece on the European game board. Look at the difference. While kings like Louis XI of France, although also manipulative, showed acute political intelligence and iron control over his kingdom, Carlos VIII lacked that cunning. His reign, although short, serves as an example of how the lack of experience and the influence of ambitious advisors can lead a monarch to ruin, even one with the title of King of France. Comparing it with your contemporaries helps us better understand your destiny. But unlike Enrique or the Catholic monarchs, the short Italian campaign of Carlos VIII had a surprising cultural impact. Think about it. A young French king with his army, crossing the Alps and arriving in Italy. It was an energy injection, an explosion of new ideas and art that until that moment had remained relatively isolated. Imagine the encounter between French and Italian artists, the fusion of architectural styles, the influence of Italian painting in French, the incorporation of new techniques and perspectives. It was an unprecedented cultural exchange, a bridge between two artistic worlds that until then had evolved relatively independently. The Italian Renaissance, with its artistic flourishing, spread to France, even if it is embryonic. Prosody speak prosody rate equals 90%. French architecture began to incorporate Italian elements. Elegance and sophistication of the Renaissance were leaked in the French court. It was not a definitive military conquest, but a cultural conquest, a subtle but deep exchange that left an indelible mark on French art and culture. Think of the influence that this had, not only in painting and architecture, but also in literature, music, and decorative arts. Imagine this. A young French king, just returned from Italy. The aroma of spices and memories of Italian palaces are still fresh in your memory. Not only have you seen battles, but also a world of art, architecture, and refinement that eclipses everything you knew in France. The splendor of Florence, the greatness of Rome, all that has left an indelible brand in you. Suddenly, your castle in France feels outdated. The Italian frescoes, the Renaissance perspective, the elegance of the villas, all that contrasts with the Gothic architecture of your country. You begin to desire a transformation, a change of airs, an injection of that new Italian style in your own possessions. The influence is not limited to architecture, of course. Italian artists, with their innovative techniques and their vision of the world, begin to reach your cut. His paintings, his sculptures, his designs, everything influences the way art is seen and perceived in France. The Italian elegance filters into fashion, in the decoration of the palaces, even in the customs of the court. That a fascinating cultural exchange occurs. But how has Carlos VIII arrived at our popular culture? Do you remember it as a king simply in history books? Well, no. His figure, despite his short life and reign, has inspired writers and filmmakers. Think of historical novels and epic films. Can you imagine a movie about your Italian campaign? The battles, the Renaissance palaces, the drama. There is incredible narrative potential there. Although he is not a character as famous as other French kings, his young and ambitious figure, his brief but intense Italian adventure, they make him an ideal character for fiction. Imagine a scene. He, surrounded by directors, discussing the strategy to conquer Naples. Tension, ambition, uncertainty. A perfect scene for cinema. Perhaps there is no biographical film dedicated exclusively to him, but his story has been intertwined with others, appearing as a secondary character, an event catalyst. Think about the possibilities. A romance in the middle of the war, palatial intrigues, betrayals. Its history is full of potential to be adapted to different media. What do you think of a miniseries? It would be epic. But what is beyond battles and palatial intrigues? Your reign, Carlos, is full of mysteries that continue to speak. Were you really as naive as historians paint? Or did you play a more strategic role that is believed? Did you manipulate you completely? Or were you able to make your own decisions, even if they were wrong? The speed of your Italian conquest. Was it a genius or madness? Some say that your ambition blinded you, others that luck favored you. What do you think? Was it a blow of luck, a master strategy, or a combination of both? And speaking of Italy, how far would your ambition go if you had lived longer? Your premature death at 28 leaves many unanswered questions. Did your fragile health really influence your decisions? Or was he a victim of a conspiracy? What would have happened if you had lived more? Would the course of European history have changed? Would you have consolidated your power in Italy, or would you have faced greater resistance? So what was your legacy, Carlos? Despite your short life and reign, you left an indelible footprint. Your ambition, although poorly directed by your directors, promoted changes in French politics. The Italy's war, although it ended in failure for you, marked a turning point in international relations and French expansion aspirations. Your early death, at 28, left a power vacuum that triggered new struggles and conflicts. Even so, your figure serves as a reminder of the fragility of power and influence that directors can exert on a young and inexperienced monarch. Did you become a pawn in a much larger game than you? Beyond the military victories and defeats, your reign represents a period of transition in the history of France. The passage of the Medievo to the Renaissance is reflected in your figure, a child king victim of the ambitions of others, but, however, marked a turning point in French history. Your history reminds us of the importance of political stability and the influence of the figures surrounding power. Prosody / speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. But how do we know all this? To understand the life of Carlos VIII, you need to enter the historical sources that I recommend you start with contemporary chronicles. Imagine reading the stories of those who knew him, his courtiers, his enemies. His words will transport you directly to the time that he looks for French and Italian chronicles, since his reign hit both nations. In addition to the chronicles, there are numerous modern historical studies. Look for academic books that analyze their reign, their military campaigns, and its impact on European policy. Do not limit yourself to a single author. Compare different perspectives to obtain a more complete vision. Remember that history is a process of interpretation, and each historian contributes its own analysis. If you prefer a more visual format, there are documentaries about the period that could help you. Look for those that focus on the figure of Carlos VIII or in the Italian Wars. These documentaries usually include file images, recreations, and interviews with experts, which can enrich your understanding. Always remember to contrast information from different sources. And here we arrive with the history of the young King Carlos VIII. I hope you enjoyed this trip to the past, full of intrigues, wars, and the complex life of a monarch who, despite his young age, marked the story of France. Remember that history is much more than dates and names. It is a narrative of human lives, full of successes and errors, triumphs and failures. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel so as not to miss future episodes about fascinating historical characters. Share this video with your friends if you liked it, and leave me a comment telling me what you think of the story of Carlos VIII. Your opinion is very important for me and helps me improve. I want to especially thank all those who have contributed to the creation of this video, from the investigation to the edition. Your support is essential for you to continue creating quality content for you. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. Remember that the story is full of fascinating surprises and characters. Keep exploring, keep learning, and until the next historical adventure. Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed learning about Carlos VIII. If you liked it, give like and subscribe for more. What do you think about your tragic destiny? /prosody / speak.